I say that because I don't see the same thing happening for yellow. I'm just saying.
Again, that's another thing that I found interesting too, because the yellow power movement, I don't know what was going on in the 60s and 70s, but we were on fire during that time. Actually, no, I do know what happened.
The Pan-Asian movement took a lot of inspiration from the Pan-African movement, but
as it should.
Yes, it should. But I think what happened was also we're caught in between, right? We're caught at like we were talking about earlier, there is that like we want to be that model minority. Mm-hmm. We want to be the ones that don't get into trouble. We don't have the power to fight back. What do? Assimilate? But what side do you assimilate to?
Again, that's what I'm saying. I was like, no, I do know what happened.
Because
after the power movements. Oh, I was like, did you
well, I was going to tie in this because one of the things that people don't realize, and I'm going to say this now, and I want to see what the reaction is, because
remember, strong opinions this episode.
Yes.
Holy crap, I'm going to bring in some 1800 like knowledge here.
Go ahead.
I was actually going to tie in like 1400 silk trade stuff also, but that's too far out there.
Oh, about all those Chinese artifacts that were found in like
actually,
Sierra Leone and Senegal.
Even, I mean, that's a very fun fact, but I was actually going to say this, right? Back in the Middle Ages, people thought money was dirty. Not just physically dirty, but spiritually dirty.
Yep.
So, guess who made all the money back in Europe? The Jews.
Uh-huh.
And because it was 1400s, like 13, 14, 1500s, like the Silk Trade was going on, the Silk Road, all of that, right? So it was the Chinese merchants making money. Not the not the manufacturers. The merchants were making money. Mm-hmm. They got to go through what is now the Turkish Ottoman Empire, like all that. So those merchants were making money, and then every road leads to Rome, right?
Yep. The
Rome papacy at one point was in the pockets of the Medici family.
Ooh.
So Florence, the Medici bank was making fucking money. And they essentially, I believe they were at one point Jews. And I say one point because they converted to Catholicism. Because if you know your European history, if you were a Jew in the 14th, 15th, like all of those, like 14th and 15th centuries, you weren't necessarily, you weren't persecuted to the sense of World War II, but you were still persecuted against. Mm-hmm. So they would basically say, if you're Islamic, if you're a Muslim, totally fine.
Right.
If you're a Jew, you Christian, but you're not Christian like us.
Right.
So we're gonna chase you from our lands.
There was that whole thing that,
Spanish,
a lot of Catholics were really upset about that whole y'all sent Jesus to the cross thing.
Yeah. And so the Medici bank, the Medici family, they were Catholic.
Yeah.
But probably had Jewish roots.
I mean, just a little random fun fact. People have now found out and found some links to Columbus. That Columbus is actually Jewish. That there was also another Jewish person. Two Jewish people not only funded a lot of his exploration because they were trying to run away from a lot of this stuff, which is why they came to America.
Which is why they were looking for land to begin with. Because they were already looking to leave Europe behind. Like they knew they can't live there.
Exactly. So there was also a guy on the voyage with him that was also Jewish too.
So I bring that up, right? But I also want to bring this. Did you all know that President Theodore Roosevelt, sorry, bad Asian again.
The old one. No, it was just on there twice. It's fine.
He actually started to view Japan as an ally to the U.S., not because he actually really liked Japan, but because he was viewing Japan as an ally to the China problem.
Yep.
Does that sound familiar?
Oh, so another model minority. Set up one minority against a majority you don't want around.
Exactly.
But also that phrasing, the China problem.
Right.
Look, I'm Taiwanese.
We still say this.
I'm Taiwanese, and I admit that there might be some, but what I'm trying to say is this setup of like, oh hey, that entire country is a problem. Like, no.
Right.
It's not the people.
Right.
But if you say it as the China problem, then that becomes, again, back to the 1800s, right?
Exactly.
The Chinese are the sick man of the East.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds a lot like COVID to me, where it was like, oh, the Wuhan virus, the China virus.
Well, I mean, people also don't want to know that, they've been doing the U.S. has been doing experiments in China specifically because of that. Just letting y'all know. That's why it was, all that thing anyway. Like, they've been doing this for years.
They've probably been doing this for decades, since at least, I want to say, SARS 2008.
Oh, no. Yeah. That's, again, this was why a lot of people didn't really, notice it, but
a lot of Asians definitely noticed it.
This version of COVID has happened number of times before in China.
It's funny because, I remember I was in Asia a month before it hit the U.S., right?
I was in London.
I was
people were coming back.
I was in Taiwan in December 2019. I think we left December 28th. Anyway. We come back and we're here, over there, we were already hearing, there's this illness, there's this flu. If you got business in China, don't travel there, da-da-da-da.
I remember hearing it in Korea, too.
Yeah.
It was already starting to become
maybe you want to limit your travel.
It was maybe we don't want to go to China right now.
Yeah, maybe we don't want to ship things from China.
Yeah.
But, I come back and I'm like, okay, I'm hearing it here, too. Interesting. Now, the phrasing isn't, hey, there's a general illness, you might want to watch your travels. It was, don't go to the Chinese supermarkets, don't go to the Chinese restaurants. If you have Chinese friends and they come back from China, don't hang out with them.
Yeah.
That was the kind of general phrasing and feeling that I was getting, which again, my white coworkers definitely didn't feel that. They were more concerned, can I get my toilet paper rolls? Can I get my spaghetti? Can I get all this miscellaneous household stuff? And I'm sitting there going, I'm more concerned that someone is going to push my mom or my dad into traffic.
Exactly.
And when I mentioned that, and I mentioned my younger cousins who are still going through grade school, they're now going into high school. But they were this is 3 years ago now? So they were in 6th grade? 5th grade, 6th grade, that age. And kids can be brutal, and they don't know what they're saying because they're hearing it from their family.
Yep.
And once I mentioned that to my coworkers, they were like, "Oh shit, I didn't even think about that."
Right.
You could avoid thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as one of the few Asians in the company at that time in the physical building, I was like, yo, if I had kids right now, I would be like, oh no, all of you are getting homeschooled now. Which is actually why so many Asians actually have started doing that.
Oh, I mean, there's a whole thing. I honestly am an advocate for homeschool. Just
if you can do it well.
I was depending on how well it's done. But that's, again, another conversation. But one of the reasons was because the way that socially public school is going, because I mean, at my first few years of school was public school, and I do remember these schools and actually have fond memories of them. Actually, it was the first time I learned Spanish because we had to say the Pledge of Allegiance in English and Spanish before going to class every single day.
We had to say the Pledge of Allegiance, but then I think in middle school they were like, oh, now you can choose to not say it.
I mean, it was a thing. It was also the 90s. I don't know what it was about the 90s, about people being so lackadaisical in...
Oh, no, this is the early 2000s.
Just so, I was starting to become very concerned, especially when it hit, because literally, I could hear what people were saying, and I'm like, you do realize that this is not the people, right?
Right.
That, and then when they were kind of just attacking generally every East Asian or lighter skinned Asian person because you have excuse me, COVID is not innate. It is a freaking illness that people get. It's not, no, what? How are you just...
And also, what is an 80-year-old grandma going to do to you?
Thank you. And that's when people are cowards and they have no home training.
And
or they're evil.
The other thing,
literally, it's all of the above.
And the other thing is, to tie this back to the whole model minority divisiveness, right? What were the ones that were actually being reported? They weren't white on Asian.
Exactly.
It was not Latino on Asian either.
Oh no, there were some out here in California.
Oh yeah, but the ones that would get circulated like no other.
It was always, yes indeed,
the black man and
always,
the Asian granny,
and it was always specifically a black man and some older East Asian person.
Right. The one that'll be pushing her little stroller with her like grocery shopping of the week.
Also, let's talk about media on that one, because yeah. But it was again, I remember talking to somebody even about, because the riots is the whole thing with me, LA riots.
Right.
Even talking about that during that time and being like, I feel like we're doing it again. And I feel like,
again, none of this is new.
Right. And I feel like we haven't talked about anything. And because we don't talk about anything and we don't know, like, this is going to get weird. But again, the LA riots was not about Black and Korean, but that's what people remember. They remember Rodney King, but they don't remember exactly why Rodney King was the one, like why he was kind of like the martyr of the LA riots. They just know his name, but then they go straight to all of the stuff happening with, Black and Koreans. But that's literally what it does. Again, it's not new. It keeps happening. And it's as I was, when I go kind of like into my piece, like that's what I was looking at. Like it's literally a device used to separate. And not separate in the sense of like, oh, it needs to, I don't know, there needs to be some category or there needs to be on there. No, it's used to divide specifically so that something else can be done or something can be said. Because again, when people talk about, oh, minorities are doing well at Ivy Leagues. Okay. But
what are you also not looking at when you say that they're doing well?
Again, my school is a baby Ivy. The only reason why it's considered a baby Ivy is because it's a smaller school. Like we started around the same time as Harvard, like very early on in America's like history, and was actually all male until the 70s. It didn't become co-ed until the 70s.
Okay.
But they're like, yeah, all the minorities are doing well here. But my junior year, and I love this story because it's just so funny to me. My junior year, we end up getting this new initiative that was supposed to be named after this gentleman. I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Davis, right? Okay. And so it was our kind of like affinity groups and everything were actually run overall by at first it was a Latina woman, and then I think they had hired on a Black gentleman or something at some point. But so they're running this, and out of all of the affinity groups on campus, the Black Student Union was the only group that actually owned the property on campus. So our house was literally owned by the Black Student Union. Everyone else was kind of like renting out their spaces, right? Actually, not even really renting out the space. It was just like you can use it.
So it's like a massive lease, like a 100-year lease or something like that.
Kind of, sort of. It was more like it's a thing on there, and we're just gonna call it by like this house. Like they kind of like came here first and kind of claimed it, kind of thing. But the Black Student Union is owned by the Black Student Union. And when this like came about, they were like, yeah, we're gonna do all these changes. We want to make sure people get access to money to have their all this stuff. They literally take this random Black student that was there in like, I want to say that the mid 1800s, something like that. Not even the Black student that we already like actually kind of celebrate on campus, but just some random other guy, right? Not only was this guy like phenotypically white because he was so like his family was actually mixed, also kind of like W.B. Du Bois. Like a lot of people didn't like him because he was so light skinned.
That's actually. Yeah. Colorism is a whole
right, but he did some stuff. I do love my boy Du Bois, but again, they take this guy and they literally put him, when the Black Student Union did not give any approval, they put a huge portrait of him inside of our, mind you, nowhere else on campus, right? They just put a huge portrait of this guy inside of our thing, and then all of a sudden there's repainting done. We've got all these quotes from Gandhi and like all this stuff, and we're like, first of all, who did this and what did it have? So we go complain to like administration because we're like, who just came in here and, you know, repainted our house and didn't tell us, right? Then there's this whole argument of, well, it's because, you know, like he would have been, because the Black Student Union didn't exist then, but he would have been, you know, a part of this. And of course, and he was very pro-Black and everything. And we're like, but we don't even know who this dude is. Then when we finally get to know who this dude is, we're like, okay, we actually might want to have him represent us, because this guy and his brother both went to my school, graduated valedictorian, right? He was in the English department, the guy that everything was named after. He was in the English department, graduated valedictorian. My school would not hire him as an English professor because he was Black.
This is reminding me of your story.
Exactly. And thank you. Literally would not hire him. So he said, F. Williams. This is the crazy part, because his family came on campus when they were literally naming like all these buildings and stuff after him. His family came on campus and basically said, take that down. You do know he said F. Williams and I don't want to be associated with y'all, and went to teach at a HBCU, right?
Because y'all wouldn't hire him because he's freaking
Thank you.
Black.
And talked about how he specifically did not pass, even though he could have.
Because he's so light-skinned.
Right. So again, the Black Student Union is still like, yeah, we want him now to represent us because he's pretty cool. Like we like what he did. But it's like, how dare you just take some random person?
Well, he wasn't random. That's right. The whole thing.
He wasn't. Yeah.
But to you in that moment.
Random. Yeah, because we had no idea who this guy was.
And again, this feeds back into this model minority. Who gets to choose who's the minority, who gets to choose why that's the model,
right? And
then in the end, who benefits from using that group
exactly.
for whatever they are.
Because who is included in all of this, and then more specifically, like who's excluded, and to what degree are they included? Because again, if we're saying model minority, like as Asians, we pass technically, right?
No, but I'm going to challenge that, because
it was like,
who is an Asian American?
Right.
Who is an Asian American?
Right.
If we're talking about different kinds of coloreds,
right?
We got to talk about how if you say Asian American here,
you're specifically more thinking about East Asian Americans, so
most
Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, and you're
lighter skinned,
right? And
Asians,
Chinese, not necessarily those from Southeast Asia. Like there are Mandarin speakers in Singapore,
right,
who would not necessarily be passed as East Asian,
right,
or could for various reasons, like better Chinese, better English, better whatever, right? But if they're darker skinned, again, if they're mixed with Malay heritage or like all of that plays into it. And also, if you are from like Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia,
it kind of don't exist.
Or even, which is crazy how the how it works and doesn't work. Indians. Especially darker skinned Indians.
If you are a lighter skinned Indian or an Indian who works in tech, or you are the doctors that we're all thinking about, the lawyers that like all the families want, you have more leeway in certain regards, right? But if you are from a lower caste, you already
but I mean also just in phenotype in America, because I remember all of the darker skinned Indian males because of racial
because they would they
would be pulled over
because they would look at you and
because they thought they were Black.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I remember
you fit the description.
Right? Like visually, we can't really see you for some reason. It's like,
no, there's a reason.
Right. There's a reason.
There's a reason for all of that, but they're not going to really tell you to your face.
Right. Of all that profiling. But, and it also works in a way to, again, who does it benefit? With this model minority myth, a lot of the things that I'm seeing happen too, especially in, because I work with like county associations and stuff, a lot of the things that I'm seeing are, a big part of the county is very, like, they're all ethnically from some country in Asia.
Right. Especially if you look at LA now, Southern California.
They
now.
just actually, one woman, she finally, I don't know if I can't remember. I'm so sorry if she passed or if she just retired. But this woman was 102 years old and had been working at the county for like literally the longest running. I think the woman was Chinese. And I'm like, okay, but nobody knew about her until this like recent thing.
That's really unfortunate.
Like, but again, like, but they're thinking, oh, non-problematic,
right.
and on top of that, she's a woman.
You're disparaged against on both fronts.
Exactly, and then it gets into this thing of like when people do actually need some sort of help, or people do actually need to. Again, we have been talking about this like earlier when it came to like home ownership and stuff. Yeah, like you're kind of like, well, y'all got houses and you own them. Depends on who you're talking about and where.
Also, by the way, if you guys hear some interesting background noises, it's because I have 3 cats around here right now. And one of them is a hyperactive teenage boy cat.
But yeah, like it's a lot of these things that I'm just like, it's also stopping a lot of them from getting into like becoming I think it's like being the board of directors in the county. Or like now they just realize that I don't think there's any, or there's very few. There might be a couple, but I don't think I don't think there are any in LA County for our, what do we call our county supervisors? I don't think any of them are Asian.
I will say I think there are several of them.
5,
right. They're all females, but I don't think any of them are Asian.
So
no, because they're not. Because Hilda Solis has apparently the largest number of, I think, like Asian constituents.
Well, coming from the Inland Empire,
it's also because of redistricting. Yeah, because a lot of them were actually like with under Holly Mitchell and what's the other lady? It was another lady.
So the other thing is like, redistricting. Districts play a huge role in this, in terms of where the Asian districts are.
Again, it's back to money and power.
Right. And it's more like, I feel like for a lot of the Asians that are interested in politics, right? Because a lot of us aren't, because of historically cultural issues that have come with politics and race. And that's not limited to being in the US.
It's because of the sanitizing. Like you were saying in a previous episode about Dr. King. Like we haven't even talked about Dr. King and the whole sanitization of that.
Is it not a tragedy and also outrageous that there is an argument to be made that now Dr. King can be the face of the model minority?
Right. Oh no, even back
that
then,
is disgusting.
There were people who didn't like him specifically because they thought he was too safe.
Oh yeah, that's why.
Since when?
Well, but that's also why Malcolm X had the space to be who he was. You have Dr. King on one end, and then you have Malcolm X on the other.
See, I challenge that because if you actually read all of Dr. King's stuff, you would see that he was aligned more with Malcolm X than he was with the people who thought he was a minority, including the people who are quoting him now.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, again, the sanitization of him poses that very...
Oh yeah, they make, which is kind of
that
funny.
happened after he was
killed. It did.
That didn't happen when he was active.
It did. And it's very interesting of that.
Who is the model? Who gets to set the model?
Who writes the history?
You know? Right. And so, like anyone who quotes Dr. King now, you have to wonder why? Because again, who is setting the stakes here? Like, why are you quoting him?
Right. So actually, I was going to say this and I was going to bring it back to this segment for now. It makes me wonder if they really thought quoting Dr. King or sanitizing Dr. King's story was actually the better option of the two that they were looking at.
No, it was always the better option. Yeah. So you cannot teach Malcolm X in school now.
No,
you cannot.
I went to SF State, so I'm like, we actually have parts of our school that is named after Malcolm X.
As you should.
Right. But again, I went to SF State, which actually worked a lot with Berkeley students in the 60s for the Pan-Asian movement.
Yep.
And a lot of my teachers, when I went to school there, were students who partook in those protests.
Exactly.
So actually, with that, I was going to bring this back to, Nike had kind of brought it up earlier. The model minority also kind of hurts us, right? In the sense of, okay.
Oh, actually, I might need to cut you off because I need to go. So that seems like a good ending to
I was going to wrap it up right
Yeah.
there. But I was going to say, like, model minority, it hurts us in the sense of we are seen as perfect. So therefore, we don't have health issues. We don't have mental health issues. We don't have social issues. Our marriages are perfect. Our families are great. We don't need any assistance from the government.
And we make money.
And so then the government is essentially like, oh, you don't need us. Close the door.
Which is kind of sad because Black people always kind of figured that the government was never going to help us in the first
And
place.
that's actually, I think a lot of Asian families to this day are like, well, even if we need it, we're not going to get it. And if we're going to get it to some degree, you have to jump through so many hoops.
Unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that until it's unfortunately too late.
Yeah. So with that, as we have shown, we have a lot to talk about when it comes to model minority, and there's just so much ground to cover.
Don't feel like you have to do an outro.
Yeah.
No. This is all going to be edited down anyway.
Yeah.
So we can even record like a, like an
This
outro
is
later.
what happens.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's actually
Depending
what I
on
was
how
gonna
we cut this up.
do. I'm gonna end the recording actually here.
Okay.